Thank you so much, Jillian. I appreciate that very much. Um, and I appreciate the invitation from ACTLA to be part of this amazing panel. Um, I too am working at home, as you can see, primarily at my kitchen table, which is not ideal, but has worked okay. The courts also closed. I was also at work on March 13th, which was my last sitting day. Although we are doing a number of different kinds of applications remotely, and I have had a couple of weeks assigned to emergency matters that are still being heard in the courthouse. And we're beginning to ramp up. So all of us will be taking on more in-person and more remote and written desk work in an effort to try and address the backlog over the course of the summer. I also have a dog at home, and I think he was initially quite happy about all of that, but he's resisting now the 4 or 5 walks a day I think he should have, and spends most of his day hiding underneath the table in the living room. I will tell you briefly how it is that I became involved in the mental health arena, I guess. About 15 years ago, this is an abbreviated version. I want to make sure that Rumana has lots of time for what I know is a very compelling presentation. My own story really begins about 15 years ago when in the fall of that year, I began to be very sad. And I'm not a sad person. I'm a quite happy person. My status quo is very much that way. I'd always been a happy person. I'd never suffered from any sort of prolonged feelings of depression or sadness, but that's what it was. And every day it sort of became more and more apparent that this wasn't just a day-long thing. It wasn't just some crappy thing happened and I felt bad about that. It was persistent and it was worsening. And worst of all, there was no explanation for it at all. And so, as a problem solver, which most of us are, I was quite determined to figure out what it was that was wrong, that was bothering me, and then, of course, just fix it and be okay. That was the plan. But there wasn't anything wrong. I was a partner in my firm, Dumpy Best Bloxham. I just become a partner. I had a good practice. I had a great client base and lots of work to do. And I liked my clients. I loved practicing law. I really enjoyed my partners. They were, still are, a great group of people. And at home, everything was great there too. I have, as you heard, twin daughters, and they were finishing high school at that time and starting to look towards university, and they had many, many opportunities. They were and remain real go-getters, and so they had lots of options for where they were going to go. And skipping to the end of the story, or at least the explanation for the story, that was, as it turned out, my precipitating circumstance. I had raised those kids alone. My husband and I separated when the girls were about 2. So, and I'd been alone all those years, alone with them. And so the prospect, frankly, of them leaving together, right? Because they were twins. So they were not only going away to university, but there was no staggering. It was 3 of us, and then it was going to be 1 of us. And that prospect, I struggle every time I talk about this to communicate, because I can't even now really understand why that was so devastating to me. But the prospect of the girls leaving just was terrifying to me. I knew that they were going to go away, and I accepted that. In fact, again, even once I identified that with some help as the reason for my depression, I knew it was inevitable, and I wanted them to go. We raise our kids so that they will be confident and self-assured, and so they'll go out there and take over the world. And so I wanted them to go. I never would have considered trying to prevent that from happening. But I felt like I was in a canoe headed for the waterfall, and it was going to happen. And I would have done anything to keep it from happening, but it was going to happen. And that certainty of that, and that fear of, it's a bit like Maria talked about, that fear of what will I be without them. It's still hard. They've been gone for 15 years, and we talk every day, everything is fine. But it isn't hard for me to remember how scared I was of a life without them. So anyway, it got worse and worse and worse. My response to that was to berate myself, along the lines of, this is stupid, that's a dumb reason, of course they're going away, you always knew they were going to go away, snap out of it. Objectively, I knew that there were a lot of things about my reaction that didn't make sense. And so I tried to appeal to my sense of logic. And as I said, just, chose to berate myself into mental health. And perhaps not surprisingly, that did not work at all. I got worse and worse and worse. And my depression crossed whatever line that is to clinical, to the point where I could not get out of bed. Well, first I couldn't go to bed at night because just the prospect of getting ready for bed was exhausting. In the mornings, I would lay in bed and be unable to get up. It would sometimes take me hours to just get showered and dressed and get downtown to my office. And some days I would get to my office and check in with my assistant and go into my office. We had closed paneling and all of that kind of stuff. We didn't have see-through doors. And I would go into my office and lay down on the floor and cry for hours at work. I stopped eating because I didn't care about food. I stopped exercising because I didn't care about that. I stopped reaching out to people. I stopped socializing. I dreaded socializing, which is not me. And in fact, it was a CBA event at which our then executive director asked me after a meeting when we were headed to dinner, and I was just dreading going to dinner, asked me if I was okay. And I just dissolved into tears. And she said, okay, well, you're not okay, so you don't need to answer that, but you do need to talk to someone. You need to get some help, because whatever's going on, it's bigger than what you can deal with yourself, which of course was true. And I recognized it immediately as being true. So that began a process of recovery that that lasted about a year and a half, 2 years. So I try when I tell this story to make sure that people understand it wasn't, it wasn't an aha moment that immediately once I realized, oh, it's because my kids are leaving, and I began to take antidepressants and I began to see a counselor. It was a process, but I was incredibly fortunate to have the resources available to me to get through that, to recover. And I was even more fortunate to be doing so in a work environment that was very supportive. My partners were very supportive of me during that time. And it's not that there were not financial repercussions to me, because of course there were, but I didn't have job insecurity. My partnership wasn't on the line. And I also always make sure to note that, particularly for young lawyers, for students and young associates, that may not be or may not feel like it's the case. And so I recognize that people in those situations um, have a lot more to manage than what I did. Um, I took away a couple of lessons that I try to pass on when I'm given the opportunity to do that, and frankly, use those opportunities to remind myself of what I've learned, which I seem to need a lot of reminding. One is that, as you can see today, mental health, my mental health, can be quite fragile. And even if fragile is not the right word, certainly at a minimum, it is never to be taken for granted. And so I have been really committed to thinking about my mental health and to trying to care for myself. I will tell you, one of the reasons that I feel more fragile right now is honestly my new job. I guess I've been appointed a few years now. I still feel like it's quite new. Has brought with it some very different challenges, things that I probably could have identified beforehand, but really didn't, or at least didn't understand. And none of this is to say that I don't love being a judge. I do. It's absolutely, the work is unbelievably amazing, and I'm really grateful for it. But the nature of the things that we see and hear every day can be really difficult. And everyone's pressure points are going to be different. We all come to the bench as judges with different backgrounds, and that informs to some extent the kinds of things that we will find more difficult to listen to all day and then take home. And so I've got a couple that I need to always be on the watch for. And the other, of course, is the nature of the work we do, which is making decisions. And they are decisions that, for the most part, are quite impactful. And I can say without reservation that judges take very seriously their obligation to make decisions, the best decisions that they can make for the people in front of them. It's one of the things about a trial court that I really like, but also, creates an emotional burden, and you have to figure out how to carry that properly and how to do the best job that you can. So that's the first lesson that I talk to myself about every day is to be mindful of my mental health and how important a piece it is of my overall health. But the other is, and this is, I think, the most important thing I will say today, is that if you are struggling, or if someone else that you know is struggling, the reason for that is not important. When I realized the composition of this panel, and I'm familiar with Maria's story, and also somewhat with Romana's story, You know, my first thought was, oh, you know, your story is just not that compelling. You shouldn't even really be doing this. But it's that kind of self recrimination that was particularly unhelpful to me in the first instance. And the fact is that we cannot judge each other. If someone that you know is struggling, it doesn't matter whether it's something that would affect you the same way or not. That person needs your help, or they need someone's help. And so I would encourage you to avoid that temptation, which I think is very human. Right now is a particularly strange time to be talking about mental health, and a particularly important time to be talking about mental health. Maria talked about the loss of control, which we're all experiencing, and which I'm going to venture to say lawyers particularly do not deal with well. We also have a lack of uncertainty. No one knows exactly what this is going to look like. And I remember in March thinking, okay, well, just tell me how long. Just tell me how long it will be, and I can manage. You know, that'll be fine. And when it became apparent that no one knew how long, I had a few days. I was able to correct course, but I had a few days that were really, really, really not good. And I know it was driven by the uncertainty that we're facing right now. I will share with you some of my current challenges. I am a person who values productivity, thanks to my parents. And so, of course, once I realized we were going to have some extended period of time, I was like, all right, I'm going to paint the house. I'm going to learn French. I'm going to go start running again. I'm going to organize all my photos. And, you know, for the time that it took to make that list, I felt fantastic. And after the first day or two, where I made zero progress on any of those, I felt horrible. And so I would encourage you, you know, really be honest with yourself and be kind about it. I think my favorite Twitter comment that I've seen about the quarantine was something like, quarantine is a bit like, you know, 1 minute you're cleaning the baseboards with a Q-tip, and the next minute you're drinking tequila and watching squirrels. So perhaps not literally, but that um, you know, that kind of juxtaposition of I'm going to get all these things done, and then, you know, I'm exhausted from doing nothing and I really need to sit down, is can't be just me that's experiencing that. And it can feel a bit whiplashy, I guess, from day to day. So here's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to balance my solo time and my time for reflection, which I always valued a lot when I didn't have it, with my need for social connection. So we do the Zoom dinners and all of those kinds of things. But I also have a fair bit of alone time, and I'm trying to remind myself how valuable that is. I'm trying to balance productivity. I am doing some of those things with self-care, right? With, like, sometimes I just need to go for 6 walks a day, even though that may not be accomplishing everything I need to. And I'm trying, most importantly, I think, to balance um, my anxiety and my sadness um, with gratitude. I'm in a uniquely advantageous position. I have literally nothing, nothing to worry about, really, other than, I suppose, my kids, which will always be the case. And so I do try to make sure that every day I think about all the things that I have to be grateful for. So thank you again for letting me address you. These things always take a bit out of me, but it's good. It's always a good reminder to take care of myself, which I will go and do. Thank you very much.